everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're looking at something a little different, a little heavier than our usual topics.
Yeah.
Personal safety.
Important, though.
It is super important, and we found this article. It lists 10 situations where women especially should be extra cautious because they can be dangerous.
This is about being aware, not being afraid.
Yeah, exactly.
Like
leveling up your street smarts.
Exactly.
So the article starts off by kind of grouping a few points together. It's all about, like, being in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Right.
Which, makes sense on the surface, but then it gets really specific, and that's where it gets really interesting.
And that's where I think it gets really fascinating, is because it doesn't go down the route of blaming anyone.
Right.
It's actually about understanding how predators might be thinking.
Right.
And how they might exploit vulnerability.
Yeah.
So, for instance, the article mentions traveling late at night on public transportation. And actually cites a case from Vienna where a woman was murdered on a night bus.
Oh, wow.
So it's, a stark reminder to be extra cautious in those situations.
It is scary. And it makes you think, like, okay, besides maybe taking a taxi, if that's an option, what could she have done differently? Like, what are some things that maybe our listeners can think about doing if they're on public transportation, especially late at night, to make themselves feel a little bit safer?
That's a great question. I think a couple of things spring to mind immediately. Sitting near the driver, if you can.
Okay.
Or in a well-lit area.
Okay.
And letting someone know your route and your expected arrival time.
Right.
Just so that if anything were to happen, somebody knows where to start looking.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. I'm definitely guilty of not always doing that.
Yeah.
Okay. Another point they bring up is living in a high crime area. Now, obviously, not everyone has the luxury of choosing where they live.
Right.
But for those who are maybe considering a move or something, what are some things that you would say, like, oh, be careful about that? That's maybe a red flag.
So things like visible signs of gang activity can be a bit of a red flag.
Okay.
Poorly lit streets.
Yeah.
A high number of vacant or rundown buildings.
Okay.
Those can all be indicators of an area that's perhaps less safe. And if you can, talk to people who live in the neighborhood.
Right.
Get a feel for the community and see what their experience has been.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's kind of like, doing your due diligence. Like before you buy a car, you want to check its history, right?
Of course.
Okay. So this one really surprised me. They list running alone in nature, like on trails or in parks, as a high-risk activity. And get this, even having a big dog with you isn't always a deterrent.
Yeah.
They mentioned this case from 2018. This young woman was murdered while she was running with her dog.
Right. And I think that case is particularly disturbing because it challenges a lot of our assumptions about safety.
Right.
We often think, oh, I've got a dog. I've got a big dog.
I'm safe.
I'll be fine. But sadly, as that case illustrates, it's not always true. Which leads to the question of how do you stay safe when you're enjoying those sorts of outdoor activities?
Yeah.
And I think the key takeaways there are choosing well-populated routes, well-lit routes, potentially running with a buddy, letting someone know your route and your estimated return time.
Okay.
Those sorts of things.
Yeah. That's good practical advice, but it's still scary to think that something as simple as, like, going for a run could be dangerous.
Yeah.
It makes you really question, like, who can you trust?
And that leads us nicely into the next little cluster of points from the article, which are all about the potential dangers of trusting the wrong people, which is a tough topic to discuss.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's an essential one.
Okay, well, let's unpack this a little bit. So the article mentions renting a room to a single man as being, like, a potentially risky situation. I mean, I've definitely been in that situation myself.
Yeah.
How do you balance personal safety with, like, not discriminating against potential tenants?
It's a very difficult balance to strike. And I think it's important to remember that we can't judge individuals solely based on stereotypes.
Right.
However, it is important to take precautions. So thoroughly vetting applicants.
Okay.
Running background checks if that's possible.
Yeah.
And trusting your gut instincts are all really important steps. And honestly, consider whether having a roommate, regardless of gender,
interesting,
might provide that extra layer of security.
Right. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about the roommate angle. Okay. So the article also talks about the dangers of inviting repairmen or contractors into your home when you're alone. Again, I've done that countless times.
It's one of those things we have to do.
You have to do it, right?
Yeah.
So what are some things our listeners can do to maybe minimize the risk in those situations?
Verification is key.
Okay.
Don't just take someone's word for it. If they say, oh, I'm from such and such company,
right,
call the company and confirm.
Okay.
Ask for identification. Don't be afraid to reschedule if you feel uneasy.
Good point. It's almost like the more official something seems, the less wary we are.
Perhaps, yeah.
Because they even mentioned that model who was murdered during a photo shoot. Like, that just seems so official.
Yeah.
You would never.
It's a reminder that appearances can be deceiving.
Absolutely.
And I think that brings us to another point that they make in the article, which is particularly relevant.
Okay.
Which is meeting somebody from online for the first time.
Yeah.
Especially in a secluded location.
Oh, absolutely. You hear about those horror stories all the time.
You do.
But it's hard to know where to draw the line, right? Because what if you've been chatting with someone for weeks and they seem totally normal?
Sure. I think it's fine to be cautious.
Yeah.
Even when things seem fine.
Right.
So always meet in a public place for the first few times.
Okay.
Let somebody know where you're going. And don't be afraid to cut the date short if you feel uncomfortable.
Good advice. And again, it's like your safety is more important than being polite.
Absolutely.
And while we're talking about trusting your gut, they also mention the danger of meeting up with someone who has been making you uncomfortable, like a stalker or someone who won't take no for an answer.
Right.
Which again comes back to that feeling of pressure or obligation.
It does. But remember, you are never obligated to meet with anyone who makes you feel unsafe.
Right.
Trust your instincts. If someone is making you uncomfortable, don't hesitate to block them, report them, or even involve the authorities if necessary.
Good reminder. Your safety comes first, always. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground already. And I have to say, I'm feeling more aware of potential dangers. But what's interesting to me is that the article kind of shifts gears now and starts talking about situations where you might not expect to be vulnerable. Like being in a crowd.
That's where it gets really interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
You'd think being surrounded by people would give you safety in numbers.
Right.
But the article makes a compelling case for why that's not always the case.
All right, well, let's dive into that. I'm curious to hear more about these like hidden dangers in crowds.
Let's do it. Yeah, so you would think that, right? Being surrounded by people, you're safer.
Safety in numbers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they talk about how that isn't always the case. Like you think about protests or demonstrations.
Yeah.
Even if they're intended to be peaceful, things can get out of hand pretty quickly. And you don't have as much control over your immediate surroundings.
Right. They mentioned this case from 2017, a woman who was assaulted during a protest in New York.
Yeah.
Just goes to show you're not necessarily safe just because there are a lot of people around.
No.
And what's even more surprising, they also list living on a ground floor with like open windows as a potential risk. I love having fresh air, but now I'm thinking twice.
I mean, it makes sense when you think about it from a purely, vulnerability standpoint.
Yeah.
It's much easier to access a ground floor apartment, especially if there are windows or a balcony.
Oh, absolutely. And they even mention a case from 2016 where a woman was actually murdered in her apartment and she was on an upper floor.
Oh.
But the guy actually climbed the building to get to her balcony.
Yeah.
So it's like, oh gosh, even living on a higher floor doesn't guarantee your safety.
No.
So what can people do besides the obvious, like locking doors and windows to make their homes safer?
So security systems, even just like a simple one, can be a deterrent.
Okay.
Motion sensor lights are great for deterring people as well.
Okay.
And this is one that people often overlook, but get to know your neighbors.
Yeah.
Look out for each other.
Yeah.
If you see something suspicious, report it.
It takes a village.
Exactly.
All right. So we've talked about being aware of our surroundings, especially in those places where we might think we're safe. But what about when you're just like walking down the street, lost in thought or listening to music? The article brings up one final point that I think probably resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. And it's something I think we're all guilty of at times. Walking around with headphones in, totally oblivious.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Especially like walking home from work or something. I just pop those headphones in and I'm in my own world.
Yeah.
But now I'm thinking, maybe not the safest habit.
Yeah. And they actually highlight a case from 2015 where a woman was abducted while walking with her headphones in. And because she couldn't hear the attacker coming.
Oh, wow.
She was a much easier target.
That's terrifying. Makes you realize how easily you can get distracted and lose track of what's going on around you.
Yeah.
So what's the solution? Should we all just stop listening to music or podcasts when we're out?
I don't think you have to eliminate those things entirely. It's about finding a balance.
Okay.
Maybe keep one earbud out so you can still hear what's going on around you.
Right.
If you're in a more secluded area, maybe consider pausing the music for a bit.
Yeah.
Just be a bit more vigilant. It's all about being present and aware of your surroundings.
Right. Keep your head on a swivel. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about the wrong places to be, the wrong people to trust, the importance of being aware of your surroundings. It's been a lot to take in, but honestly, I'm feeling more empowered than scared.
That's good. It's like, Mara, now that I know about these things, I can take steps to avoid them.
Exactly. So beyond the specifics, are there any general principles that our listeners can kind of apply to their everyday lives to enhance their personal safety?
That's a great question. Let's kind of move away from the specifics and think about more overarching strategies.
Okay.
And I think one of the most important things is trusting your gut. If something feels off, it probably is.
Right.
Don't ignore those feelings, even if you can't logically explain them.
It's like that feeling when you know you left the stove on, but you can't remember turning it off.
Exactly. It's your intuition telling you something's not right. So trust it.
Trust it.
Another important one, I think, is projecting confidence.
Yeah.
Predators often target people who appear vulnerable or unsure of themselves. So walk with purpose.
Okay.
Make eye contact.
Okay.
And don't be afraid to speak up if you feel threatened.
Also, it's like fake it till you make it, but with confidence.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. But what about those times when we genuinely do feel vulnerable? Like, say you're walking home alone at night and you get that creepy feeling that someone is following you.
Yeah.
What should you do?
Yeah, that's a really common fear. And it's a tricky situation.
It is.
You've got that fight or flight response kicking in.
Yeah.
But the key thing is to have a plan. So first and foremost, trust your gut. If you feel like you're being followed, don't ignore that feeling. Try changing your route.
Okay.
Walk towards a busier, well-lit area if you can, and ideally call somebody.
Okay.
Let them know where you are and what's happening.
Right. I've heard you should turn around and face the person who you think is following you. Yeah. Just to kind of throw them off guard.
That's a great tactic. Yeah. Because it disrupts their plan. It shows that you're aware, you're alert.
Right.
And it also gives you a chance to assess the situation.
Yeah.
Maybe they weren't actually following you. Maybe you're just being a bit paranoid.
Right.
But either way, better safe than sorry.
Absolutely. So we've talked about trusting our gut, projecting confidence.
Right.
What other strategies can we use to build those layers of protection?
Well, I think self-defense classes can be a really good way to empower yourself. Not only do they teach you practical physical techniques, but they also build confidence and awareness.
I've always thought about taking a self-defense class, but I'll admit I'm a little bit scared of actually having to use it.
I think that's a very natural fear.
Yeah.
But remember, the goal of self-defense isn't to become some kind of martial arts expert.
Right.
It's about having those tools and the mindset to protect yourself if you absolutely have to.
Right. So like a last resort.
Exactly.
But one you're prepared for. Okay, I'm feeling more motivated to sign up for that class now.
Good.
What about those personal safety apps?
Oh, those are great. Yeah, there are some fantastic apps out there now.
Yeah.
GPS tracking, emergency alerts, even a siren you can activate if you feel threatened.
Wow. Technology to the rescue, right?
It is, yeah.
I'm going to check some of those out. Okay, well, we covered a lot in this deep dive. From scary scenarios to practical tips, it's been quite a ride.
Yeah.
But I'm feeling more empowered than ever.
That's great to hear. And, personal safety is not just about avoiding danger. It's about living with confidence and awareness.
So true. And taking ownership of our safety. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface here, though.
Oh, absolutely.
There's so much more to explore.
Yeah.
Like specific strategies for different situations, the psychology of predators, how to support survivors of violence.
All really important topics. And we encourage you, our listeners, to continue this conversation with us.
Yes.
What are your personal safety tips and strategies? What resources have you found helpful? Share your thoughts and experiences with us in the comments.
Yeah, let's create a community of empowered people.
Absolutely.
Committed to safety.
Well, that's a great place to wrap things up. We talk about specific situations, but also those broader principles of awareness and preparedness.
Remember, everyone, knowledge is power. And by understanding the risks out there, we can all take steps to stay safe. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into personal safety.